All right. Welcome, everybody, to Mystic Mondays. I have a special guest today, and I'm so excited to have you on because, as some of you know, I went to the True Crime Podcast Festival, and I had such a blast meeting so many amazing podcasters.
Hey, ghoul friends. My name is Ayden or Adrian. Either way, I am the host of a podcast called Susto. And Susto itself is centered on paranormal folklore from Latin American and Hispanic cultures. So if you've never listened to the show, each episode focuses on a different legend and it's very narrative driven. So I like to tell the stories with music and sound effects. And then after, I like to have a conversation about whether or not there are any deeper meanings to these stories.
I love that. And is there anything that really got you into doing this kind of work, or what was like the turning point for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up on the Texas Mexico border in a region of South Texas called the Rio Grande Valley. And I grew up hearing these stories. They were just so ingrained in my childhood. So this book is called Stories That Must Not Die. There you can see it.
Yeah.
And they read this to us in elementary. And this is actually the copy from my elementary classroom. There's my mom's name because she volunteered in my schools growing up. And this book is full of different folk tales. A lot of them are scary. I don't know if I can find it right away. I don't want to like earmark this thing because it's so precious to me. But there's stories of La Llorona, La Lechuzas. This one is Dancing with the Ghost. But they didn't only read this to us to scare the shit out of a bunch of kids. These stories are in English and Spanish. And then at the end of each story, there are a set of questions. You can see that right there.
I love
Um,
that.
and so they were, in a way, teaching us reading comprehension through folklore and sometimes through paranormal folklore. And so, again, when I say this is deeply ingrained into my upbringing, it really is. And so I just, when I started listening to podcasts, I wanted to hear a podcast about these stories that I heard growing up. And I couldn't find one that fit exactly what I had imagined. And so I decided to do it myself. And 5 years later, here I am with Susto sharing these stories. And in doing the show itself, I've also been able to make connections within the Latin American and Hispanic diaspora because I'm Mexican American. Again, I grew up on the Texas-Mexico border, but I've made connections to several cultures under that umbrella because it's not just Mexicans.
Yeah, that is so beautiful. And I'm gonna have to like, where can you buy that book online?
It is very hard to find right now. This is so it's like I think it was a single run of prints that they did. So I've seen other hardcover copies like this one online for anywhere up to like $500.
Wow.
And they're since after the first one, they released several volumes. Um, I think with different stories, or they kind of maybe broke the stories apart from this one book, but this is like the most sought out one. And I happened to grow up with it. And my mom kept the copy for me and not knowing that all these years later that I would be doing this.
That's amazing. No, I love that. I think it's like so interesting because you said something that really, even when we were on the panel, I'm like, yeah, that is so true, which is one of the reasons why I also started doing spooky stuff online was the idea that in terms of folklore, urban legends, ghost stories, there isn't really many people like us that are telling these stories, even though I would argue that a lot of these stories are deeply rooted in our culture. Some of these are very much like branches and adjacent to our experiences. Like I know in Texas, they're like La Llorona sightings are also in Texas or like things like that.
In a way, I feel like it's also a form of preserving the culture. Any culture that you go to and you look at their stories, you can tell a lot about the people in that culture and maybe their values and their beliefs. And yeah, again, I think that goes with any culture. So I think that's why telling these stories, especially ones that are really relevant to specific communities, even, is really important because you're keeping that culture alive.
Oh, absolutely. So I love that. Now, with that being said, I know Texas and being like when you said south of like towards that part of Texas, I was like, wow, to be honest with you, like I've never been to Texas. I do hear like most of the people will talk about like Dallas and Austin, but you never really hear anything outside of that.
Yeah.
So I guess like with that being said, what are things that you've noticed like big urban legends that are in that part of the region in Texas?
Yeah. So, I mean, definitely just to echo what you just said, every time I tell people that I'm from South Texas, they'll immediately go, "Oh, San Antonio." And I mean, no shade to the 210 people, my San Antonio folks, but I'm from South Texas. Like, we have to drive through a checkpoint to get out of that part of Texas. And I'm currently based in Austin. So, yeah, we do have some of our own legends that are specific to that area, but again, we share with other people. So I think the one of the more popular ones is the story of the girl who danced with the devil. And I grew up hearing that story that it happened at a nightclub in McAllen, Texas, which is a part of the Rio Grande Valley. And everybody, swore that it happened at this one place called Boccaccio 2000s.
Yeah.
And it happened in like 1979. But again, in doing my research for Susto, and even before that, telling that story, I heard people from San Antonio saying that it happened there at a bar called El Camaroncito. And so that's what I mean, making these different connections because they're like, actually, no, it happened here. And this one detail is different. But yeah, so there's that one. Of course, we had stories of La Llorona. The Rio Grande Valley is a very agricultural place. So there's lots of fields, lots of bodies of water. And so, of course, there are those stories of don't go near the bodies of water, especially at night, because she's going to get you. And then also, again, because of the agriculture and the ecosystem there, we have barn owls that are very popular in the area. So then, of course, we would
Yes.
hear the stories about La Lechuzas and that there were actually witches and not just owls.
I love that. Yeah, because that was something that I do recall. One of my most viral videos on TikTok was talking about La Lechuza sighting in Texas. So that definitely checks out when you're talking about that because I'm like, yep,
Yeah.
yep. I just remembered that
hmm
video went viral. With that being said, have you had any paranormal experiences?
Oh, absolutely. I actually just went on another show to tell this story in full detail, but one experience that really stuck with me, I was in like junior high or high school, and I was at an aunt and uncle's house, and again, lots of fields out there, and they lived in what we called el rancho or the ranch. And they didn't really have animals. It wasn't an actual ranch, but it was just they were plopped in the middle of like all this open land and a bunch of like what we call monte or like fields or brush. And so we were at their house late one night after a barbecue. Everybody had left except for my parents and myself, and we were sitting in their kitchen, which has the door to the backyard. And so if you could kind of picture it, I was at the head of the table, my parents were on one side, my aunts and uncle were on the other, and then directly in front of me was on the other end of the table, there was the back door. And so they start talking, of course, as we do, they start talking about creepy things that were happening on their land. And my aunt is seeing shadow people, and her sons are saying that they hear things when they get home late at night. And so, in the middle of telling us these stories, the door, that back door, and this is a wooden house, it's built on top of like cinder blocks, it's lifted. So, like, sound travels through that place, and you can feel people's footsteps. It's one of those houses. This door starts shaking violently, just back and forth, like someone's trying to get in. The handle is jiggling, it's metal, and it's so loud. And the entire room was just shaking. It was vibrating from how hard this door
Oh
was being
gosh.
pulled on. And my uncle gets up to check. He throws the door open, and there's nobody out there. And it happened, I think, like 3 times. That same thing happened. That door shaking violently, someone trying to get in. And each time my uncle went to go look, and there was nobody out there. He tried to explain it as like, oh, there's a dog or an animal or something. But again, every time he checked, nobody.
That is
So,
spooky.
yeah,
Uh,
that experience really stuck with me.
So I want to like just kind of dissect the story a little bit. I love to like just kind of imagine myself, right? So you said that it was out there like on a ranch, pretty much like you don't have any neighbors that can just walk up and then disappear. You would probably know someone was coming to visit, or it would be
Exactly.
intentional to come to visit.
hmm
Interesting. And so she's telling these stories about shadow people and all these experiences. did she ever figure out or have an idea of what kind of ghost? Was it like a man or a woman or children? Like, do you have any idea?
From what I remember, they didn't give too much detail on who they thought it may have been. Um, and again, in that same kitchen area, there was a window over the sink. Like many houses have that, and so she was telling us part of that story was that when she would wait up for her sons, she would wash dishes late at night or she'd be cleaning in the kitchen. And she said that sometimes if she looked out of that window, and again, it's the only view is just open land and monte. And so she would look out there and she could see people's shadows of like people walking by. And again, there's no reason for anybody to be out there. It wasn't on like the main road in this little town. So they couldn't really explain it. And I don't think she ever went to confront whatever was out there. And I don't blame her. I wouldn't either. Because, yeah, again, there's no reason for anyone to be out there. And I don't think they ever got any detail. But if you think about like the geography and the history of Texas, a lot of these areas and in the Rio Grande Valley, that was all land that belonged to Native people, to indigenous people. So it could be, residual energy from the people that used to live on that land, but don't anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. And that makes a lot of sense. I've always see like I recently was streaming and scrolling or not streaming, scrolling through TikTok and I saw these content creators talking about shadow people. And I think the misconception is that shadow people or seeing apparitions that are in shadow black form are evil and bad because it's a black silhouette, so it's scary. It has to be bad. You know what I mean? But I have a different opinion on that. And for me, I feel like, yeah, it could be something low vibrational, something earthbound. Sure, maybe. But I also think that shadows and seeing the shadow figures is also us seeing something like in physical form, but our eyes are not fully developed to see that. Like our abilities are not fully there. And I really like that because to your point, if they are indigenous people and natives in that land, they're not bad people.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's like, and I can only imagine people being like, oh, it's a shadow, it's evil. And it's like, well, no, let's like dive deep into this for a second. Like,
Yeah.
what could
That's
it
just
be?
the way that energy is manifesting or presenting itself, or maybe it's the only way that it can. And again, to that point of some of us don't have the abilities to see all that. You think of there are animals in this world like the mantis shrimp. That thing. It's this small sea creature, but apparently it has all these additional cones of vision, so it can see like thousands of colors that we cannot see. And so, yeah, you have to wonder, like, what are we as humans typically not able to see or to process in that way? It could be a very scientific explanation if someone is really looking for that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it also made me think of like artist. I forgot the term is called, but basically, it's the idea that some people can see different colors more than like the normal person could, and it's super rare. But to your point, it just adds on. Like sometimes there's just different ways that people can see things, and sometimes things show up as a silhouette. There's this house, the Hill House. I think that's in Texas. Have you heard of the Hill House?
I don't think I have.
Well, a user years ago, they wrote to me this email and it gave me the chills because it's called the Hill House. It's in Texas. I'll plug it in probably post. But basically, they had driven up to this house and it was two people in the vehicle. They drove to the house. It was under construction, and one person saw a young man that had red hair was wearing overalls, and the other person saw a really old man with like faded red hair and overalls. So like they saw two different versions of this man sitting there, and it just kind of adds on to this idea that like spirits can manifest in different ways and how they think that you can best perceive it too. That's another thing I like to talk to people about. So anyway, I know we're going into the whole shadow people thing, but I'm like, I really just want people to understand that we can see different ways of shadow people, and they're not always bad.
Yes.
As far as like the trembling goes, the other thing is, did that happen frequently, or was that like that one time occurrence?
I'm not too sure, and I forgot to ask my mom last time I spoke to her, and I need to call her and ask her more details about that, because it was one of those things that after it happened, we never really spoke about it. I think we're all just really shook and we didn't want to kind of remember it. I will say though that that was the first and the last time I saw that happen, because I never went back to that house after that. Um, I said, no, thank you. I will go to the other barbecues in other people's houses, but not that one. So I want to say though that I don't think it was the first time that it happened because of my aunt and my uncle's reaction to it. And my aunt was in the middle of telling us that when her and that night her sons were out, that when they were out and when they would get home, they would report, you know, hearing or seeing strange things or things that were strange to them, or that she would also see or hear things that were strange to her before they got home at night. So they knew that there was activity on their land and around their house at night. But yeah, based on the reaction, I'm not sure that it was the first time that something was trying to get in through that door.
Oh my goodness. It just gave me chills just thinking about it. Like you're talking about it, like just trembling. Oh my God.
Yeah, yeah.
Are there any other paranormal experiences that you've had that also just like stuck with you?
Okay, I do. I have one that I don't think I've ever spoken about, maybe even on my own show. But when I was in elementary, I think I may have been maybe 7 or 8 years old. One of my older sisters was she was at college, and my family had gone up one weekend either just to visit or for a holiday. I'm not sure, but we were there, and at the time she was in an apartment, and she was living on the second floor. And my parents, they told me, do not go outside, do not go play outside right now. It's raining and we're busy, so you stay in here. They like put the TV on for me, and they were watching me, but I think helping her pack, I don't know. Me being a kid, I was like, I want to go play, so I snuck out. And I had this, now that I think about it, really bad habit of climbing the staircases. But I would climb from the outside of the staircase on the rail. Like I would scale it up. I thought I was Spider-Man or something. So in this one instance, I snuck out and I got to the top of that second floor landing, and it was raining. So the rails were slippery and wet, and I was hanging from the outside of it. And I fell. I fell from the balcony or from a second floor balcony when I was a small child. And thankfully, and surprisingly, I don't know how, I only left with a broken arm. I suffered no other broken bones, no damage to the head or the brain, and I landed on concrete. And so,
Whoa.
yeah, when my parents, like, I think it was one of those moments where people always say, when you don't hear your kid, something's going on. So I think I remember them telling it that way, that they realized, like, I wasn't being a noisy kid, and they looked and I wasn't there. So of course they panic and they go outside and they found me that way. And it was, I'm getting a little emotional. It was very traumatic. And I'm getting emotional because I can't imagine the stress that my family was under finding me that way.
Absolutely.
But a couple weeks later, when we were talking about it, my mom was asking me if I remembered anything. And I can still remember it vividly, as I told her that when I was falling, I could see everything around me passing me by in slow motion, as if I was being carried down. And it wasn't until I'm getting chills. It wasn't until I was maybe about like a foot or two off the ground that I felt like I actually fell. I've never been able to explain it. I don't know what that meant or what it was, but I have that vivid memory of falling in slow motion and then hitting the ground. And then the next thing I knew is I woke up in a hospital.
Wow. Something was definitely watching over you that day. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah. I know that for sure.
Oh, I believe in stuff like that. I believe that like there's just things, and that's why I always tell people, like, I always feel like we know when something is, like, we have this like ability to feel energy around us, whether something good or bad or whatever, or the thought of thinking of somebody and it just like they call you, right? Mm-hmm. But I also believe too that like when something bad happens, like part of it is abilities, but part of it is also like your spiritual team, whatever is watching over you, whatever you believe in, that's also like sending the message to like, oh, don't go there, something bad's gonna happen, or I got you type of feeling. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Oh my gosh. And I'm glad you're okay, because that That sounds intense. Like,
It was very intense. Let me tell you, my spiritual team are sick of me. I know it because I went on to do some crazy things in my 20s. I'm giving them a break now. You know, I've settled in my 30s and a lot more even spiritually responsible. So I thank them for all the work they put in to take care of my wild ass. Yeah.
yeah, definitely. I do believe, yeah, that's, oh my God, it's going to sit with me because my husband has had similar experiences where he was, we did an episode a while back and he talked about his near death experiences. And I'm like, yeah, that should have been like, I mean, I'm glad that
Mhm.
you're alive, but how?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, no, that's interesting. Have you ever had any other experiences where you feel like they've been like watching over you since then? Or,
Um, okay, I have another one.
yeah, sorry, I love asking people these
No,
questions.
no, I love sharing them. This is another one that I don't think I've told about, but I'm very open about my HIV status. I'm living with HIV. I was diagnosed in 2014, and in the first couple years of my diagnosis, I did a lot of work surrounding HIV awareness and prevention, and I even did like public service campaigns. I was on like billboards and advertisements and buses sharing my story about managing HIV as a very manageable chronic illness, and but when I was diagnosed, I was extremely sick because I waited too long to get tested before, to the
Mm.
point that my HIV had become AIDS. And I was very sick. And I went to the hospital, and they told me that I was very lucky that I showed up when I did because they weren't sure what may have happened otherwise. And I actually, the only reason that I did go to the hospital was because I was living with my mom at the time and I collapsed in her house. And she, of course, you know, she went into mom mode and she panicked a bit, but she knew she had to take action. And so she got me into the car and drove me to the hospital. I was on bed rest for about a month or two after that. And I was told by the doctor that I needed to stay home and I needed to avoid large groups of people, children, and animals because my immune system was so shot. And
Wow.
so I had a lot of time to think in those 2 months by myself about what I wanted my life to be. And I remember this one evening. Sorry.
Oh no,
Uh,
it's okay.
I was in my sister's room because they were doing some sort of remodeling in my bedroom at the time, and so I couldn't be in there because there was too much dust and stuff in the air. So I was in my sister's room, and I remember being asleep, and I woke up. uh, But it was one of those out of body experiences. You know, people talk about them all the time where you
Yes.
can see yourself from the third person view. And it was hot, and the AC was on, and it was over the bed that I was laying in. And I could see from the side view, I was on the bed, and it looked like I was being lifted from the center. Like my body was kind of bent like this. I don't know, I'm trying to
Mm.
angle. There you go. And as if I was like levitating, and I could see the air blowing out from the AC, and it looked like flames, but it was very desaturated. It was like almost completely black and white, and it was like these flames were like blowing over me, and it almost felt like cleansing.
Yeah.
And when I say that my spiritual team, my spirit guides, that they really carried me through some crazy stuff, I really mean it. And I don't know. I feel in a way guilty for thinking this way, but I feel like my diagnosis and that near death experience, it lit something within me. Like it activated me. And it just, I don't know, it brought me into my own body
Yeah.
because I had to physically fight to stay alive. And that again, it ignites something in you. And it just flipped a switch in me where I said, I'm here, I'm present, I'm fighting for my life, and I'm going to own it and I'm going to take control of it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, thank you for being vulnerable and open about that. Like, I mean, I think those are conversations that need to be had, right? I think like not many people talk about those personal experiences of like how whether it's having a chronic illness and how that affects you. I always feel like JVN, right?
Hmm.
When I was watching Queer Eye and they talked about how they have HIV,
Hmm.
I kind of started crying for them,
Hmm.
and I feel so much empathy in general, or sympathy, sorry, sympathy, because it's like, wow, you're literally every day you're getting up, you're doing the work, and you have to put on this facade that everything's great. You are ready to, you do a podcast, you have to perform. Like,
Hmm.
that's a lot. So kudos. Like, you're so strong for enduring this, and I'm so
Yeah.
proud of you for, talking about it. And we're going to start crying.
I know.
um,
Thank you.
but you are a strong person, and it shows, like, seriously, like, from even to talking about like why you're here, why you're doing the work, and even these experiences, like, it shows like how passionate you are being here, and you're so strong, and thank you again for sharing that.
Thank you. Thank you for holding that space for me.
Of course, yeah, I'm like, oh, we're gonna start crying.
I know, right?
Well, segueing into, like, just the other side and all of those things,
Mhm.
we do have some pretty other tragic stories. Is this going to be a war? Should be
I
this a
know,
warning, like
right?
a warning
Listen, this is
episode?
what happens when you bring a cancer onto your show. The feelings they just start come pouring out.
But do you ever feel like, just before we segue into ghost stories, because you brought in some really good stories, actually, of like that part, like the south part of Texas, and some of them are very tragic, some of them are very interesting. And you already touched based on it already, but before we get started into these stories, do you feel like, because of your experiences in talking about ghost stories and urban legends, do you feel a strong connection to the other side? Like, do you feel more in tune with the energy? And like, does that also play a role as to why you're so sympathetic to these stories?
I I think so. I think definitely the things that I've been through for sure have kind of tapped me in a little bit to some of that. I feel like I just always kind of had that natural sort of ability. Um, and it's something that I know that this might be kind of a hot take, but some people very strongly about. I feel like it's something that I've always been kind of naturally tapped into, and then adding on those things. But I know that some people may think it's controversial to say that it's something that I kind of lightly lean into, because I know that there are others that think, no, you don't just dabble with this. You have to go 100% for it or nothing at all. But I think there's more nuance than that. And I can understand where they're coming from when they say that. But for someone like me, and I'll say from my own experience, yeah, I definitely feel like it's something that I lean into when I need to, definitely in times of need. Um, but yeah, I think just all of my life experiences have kind of, again, faced me in that direction to look at those things and think about them a little more deeply than it's just a scary story. And even then,
Yes.
that's also fine and fun.
Yeah, because I think I love that you said that, because I think that when it comes to ghost stories, like, there are things that I'm like, okay, we do need to take it seriously and we do need to talk about these things. But I think also, like, as an example, the movie Tarot, I did an
Mhm.
podcast episode on that with my friend Sapphire, and we talked about this, where it's like, I think it's okay to be entertaining,
Mhm.
because I trust, at least I'd like to trust, that most people are going to do their research and not end it off at the movie Tarot, and that's their definition of tarot, right? Same thing
Mhm.
with ghost stories. Like, it's like, I'd like to think that if we make it entertaining, we can also do a follow up, or they can go on and research what is the underlying meaning behind all of this. Like, those are things that I'm okay with as well. And I am a practitioner. I'm an esoteric or hermetic practitioner, so I get it.
Yeah, yeah.
So, but yeah, so I love that you said that, because I was reading these stories and I'm like, oh my goodness. Okay, so here is some of the stuff that I have on the notes.
Mhm.
So I do want to talk about the Alamo, just because I know everyone brings it up, and I feel like we'll bring that, but then we're going to segue into the south part of Texas.
Yeah.
Do you know about the Alamo? Have you ever been there or anything like that?
Yes, I think like any good Texan, I have been to the Alamo. I've heard the story, grew up learning about it in school. Yeah, I think it's interesting the stories that we are presented about the Alamo, and then the history that goes even deeper before, the battle at the Alamo.
Okay. Well, we'll do like a quick for people that don't know, just in case
Mhm.
they don't.
Yeah.
And then you can add in more of like what you know past that, because that's why I'm like, okay, we're gonna have to bring up the Alamo because as a Texan, I have to have this conversation.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so the legend of one of the most famous haunted locations in the United States is the Alamo. This site is known for its pivotal role in the Texas Revolution. It is also renowned for its ghostly inhabitants. Among these spirits, none is more captivating than the ghost of the Alamo. The Alamo, originally a Spanish mission, became a fortress during the Texas Revolution. In 1836, it was the site of a fierce battle between Texan revolutionaries and the Mexican army. Despite a valiant defense, all 18 or 189 Texan defenders perished. This tragic loss turned the Alamo into a symbol of heroism and sacrifice. Now, some people say that there's still ghosts of these soldiers. Many speculate that the spirit could be known as Davy Crockett or Jim Bowie, is how you say it? Jim Bowie? Both of who died in the battle. Witnesses describe seeing a soldier in 1830s attire, often wearing a cap or a 19th century military uniform. People see these ghostly apparitions in most common spaces, such as patrolling the grounds, and also they feel like the spirits are guarding the fortress. Sightings usually occur during the early morning or late at night when the area is quiet and undisturbed. All right, so that would make sense. I feel like a battleground would make sense why it's haunted.
Yeah. There's so much history throughout all of Texas. There were so many battles fought in Texas. So this is definitely one of those hot spots where a lot of history happened. A lot of, or like big energy impressions were made in that area.
If I were to conclude why the Alamo is so haunted, is definitely residual energy. I feel like a lot of spaces are often that. It's literally just like a tape recorder or, something just playing in loop over and over again. And like you were saying, there's so much, and there is so much, which is why I want to go. I'm surprised I haven't been to Texas because I feel
Yeah,
for what
yeah,
I
you
love,
need to
like
come visit.
for what I love to talk about and what I'm interested in, I'm like, I really want to go to Texas. Go from the native stuff to like battle and war and just even civil rights, I would argue too. It's no coincidence that there is a lot of hauntings there. When you went there, did you feel any energy?
I'm trying to remember. I mean, I haven't been there in so long. I think the last time I was there maybe in like junior high, but there's also so much, it's such a big tourist attraction now. So there's so much just, you can't tell where it's coming from basically because there's so
Mm,
many people there. I think if you were to be able to spend some time there alone when it's quiet, I'm like, it's inevitable, I feel, that you'll come across something. But yeah, the only times that I've been there is when there's like hundreds of other
yeah.
people doing the tour through it. So yeah, I haven't had the chance to experience anything there myself.
Well, I'll have to go. Whenever we're in Texas, we'll have to
Yes,
go.
yes, that'll be part of the tour.
We'll have to do something. Cool. Well, you also brought up the Jewel of the Delta.
Mhm.
So, I guess I'll read it and you can add on if you, because you know a lot about it. So, so this was a tragic story when I read this. So it says the brilliant white 56-room mansion held a splendid tiled ballroom where residents from all around the Rio Grande Valley and Mexico would gather, dressed in their finest to dance at monthly socials in the 1940s. Okay, I could kind of see that actually when I saw the images. It's pretty haunting actually to like
Yeah,
seeing it now and then thinking about what it was at one point.
yeah,
So the construction began in 1929, and there were definitely so it says here, construction began in 1929 by W.A. Harding to house potential land buyers. So their previous name was Delta Lake Hotel, which I kind of like that name a little bit better, actually. Delta
yeah,
Lake.
yeah.
And then it was purchased by the Benson family in 1945, and then they sold it to the Gotti family, who made it the Delta Lake Hotel throughout the 60s. But from what I understood is that they haven't made any repairs since then or anything like that, which makes sense based on what you see now.
Yeah. It's now, if you go by it, for anybody who hasn't seen pictures, is it's literally just like the frame. If you go, there's I mean, I haven't been in a long time. I went a couple times when I was in high school, and I have pictures. I have pictures from being there with my friends. Uh, but it was just, it looks like an architecture was drawing, the frame of this mansion, because it's all just like these bars where walls used to be.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty creepy, and it's definitely especially more creepy at night. I think before um the murder that happened there were already these kind of like local urban legends surrounding that land mansion hotel. And it was such a hotspot for like the high schoolers, to go and, oh, I dare you to go, or have you gone to the Delta Lake house? Because it's in Monte Alto, which is a town right next to, like, literally connected to the town that I grew up in. Like, that house was maybe like a 10-15 minute drive from my house growing up,
Wow.
which in the valley is not that long of a drive because everything is spread out.
Yeah, it's spread up, but like there's no traffic, so you can just get there right away.
Exactly, yeah.
Well, so this is the tragedy that you were referencing. So Laura Doyle, she was the owner, I believe, and she was found dead in 2007. So Laura Doyle was shot at least 5 times and burnt beyond recognition by her son, Christopher Hughes, who continued to live on the property with her decomposing corpse nearby. The haunting is believed to be tied to the tragic and violent death of Laura Doyle. People have talked about unexplained noises, apparitions, and just feeling like they're being watched, just very eerie sensations. Now, I love that you talked about the previous urban legends because I feel like obviously with this very tragic case, it's easy to be like, it's Laura Doyle. But to your point, it's like there's so much history to this place and people have been visiting this place for years, even prior to 2007.
Yeah, growing up, one of the stories was that it was a place where, I don't know if it was several or just one person was doing brujeria there, and that they were doing, the kind of brujeria that was not good. And so I remember going one time with a friend, and he came across this pile of like these like potted plants and like candles and stuff, and it looked like an altar, like someone had set up an altar or like a working or something, and he was about to go grab something from it. And I was like, no, I was like, don't touch that. We don't know who put that there. We don't know what their intentions were, what it's meant for. I was like, just leave it alone. And he was like, oh yeah, you're right. He was like, I don't even know why I would try and go for that. And then another time we went, and uh there was an elevator in there, and so now it's just the elevator shaft. But this time when we went, it's the shaft, so it's like this hollow long box. And we were walking by it, and we heard noises coming from it. And thankfully this was during the day. It An owl flew out of it. And so we were like, Lechuza, and like we left. It could have just been an owl, that's like a nice spot for an owl to relax in. But yeah, I've been there, I think, twice in the day, and I went once in the evening. And this was before that murder happened there, because after that, it just like, it felt really disrespectful to try and go do that.
Right.
But yeah, it was a very creepy place, and I heard stories about people going there at night and seeing things.
Wow. Oof.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, based on what you're saying too, like I feel like some of these, and I did a whole podcast episode on just like statistics of types of hauntings. Pamela's a skeptic. She doesn't believe in paranormal phenomenon. So I had her on and we talked about the different types of hauntings that people separate them into and categorize. And one thing that I really liked when we were diving into this is that there are two different types of hauntings. There is non-religious and there's just everything else like cryptids
Mhm.
and alien sightings that can also be tied in with spiritual stuff. And based on what you're saying, it feels like it falls into urban legends and also religious undertones, right? Like brujeria and demonic activity. And on top of that, there's like the tragedy, which is very awful. It's so
Mhm.
sad that that happened. I can imagine that situation for that family and the victim's family and stuff like that.
I believe the alleged motive, what the rumor was that he he did this. He killed her in an attempt to collect some sort of inheritance or insurance, and then of course to obtain the land. But then, her people noticed that she was missing, and so they started looking for her, and that's when they found her in around 2006, 2007.
Oh my gosh, that's so
Yeah.
tragic. Yeah, but I could also see, and I don't know, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I could also see people saying things like, "Oh, he was influenced by demonic things and stuff like that." I could see that
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. It just like it added to like the mystery surrounding that house already.
Well, it's interesting because we talked about that, and then you mentioned this the night of the devil dance.
Hmm.
And it actually makes me think of other stuff I've heard in Colorado. So I'm actually kind of excited that you brought this up because I'm like,
Yeah.
wait, that made me think of Colorado. Okay, so you mentioned that no one knows exactly what club this happened at, but apparently, like this is what I wrote down on April 13th, 1979. It was on a Good Friday.
Hmm.
Where there was this venue, and it was like a popular disco club in McAllen. Is that how you say
Hmm.
it?
Yeah. McAllen, Texas.
McAllen, Texas. And apparently the devil started dancing with somebody, right? But when I looked into this, I'm like, who is the devil? Like, do people know? And like people don't know why it would manifest or anything like that. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think it was just like the what do they call it in like the royal devil, like just like the general, it was the devil. I don't think it was any specific like person attached to his identity.
Okay, interesting. And then it says that this young woman defied her parents and religion to attend the club,
Mhm. Yep.
dancing with this mysterious man. And apparently, he had feet of a goat
Hmm.
and a chicken. The woman was left with burns on her skin where the stranger had touched her, and he disappeared without a trace. Now I think you do a really good job at like diving into what these stories, like you were saying earlier, really stem from. And this is definitely one of those like cautionary tale type of hauntings where somebody was being disobedient and following promiscuity and then fell into this like other plane that wasn't good for them and then they got hurt in some way,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And so it makes me think of a few other parts like the Devil's Tramping Ground in Bennett, North Carolina.
Mm.
And I've never been there personally. I had a few friends that went, and they're like, it's very underrated.
Oh. Okay.
But it's basically like the legend out there is that the devil walks in circles in this spot, leaving a perfect circle where nothing grows. And it is a mystery.
Ooh.
Yeah, like the people that went, they went for a show and they were testing the soil and they couldn't figure out why nothing grows there. But even the name in itself is like the devil's tramping ground, like the devil likes to dance or there's these ritualistic things attached to it.
Yeah.
And so there's just like this idea of like this moral undertone and certain behaviors. And then there's also the parallel of the devil sighting in San Luis Valley in Colorado, where I've done a few TikToks on this, but never specifically talked about how there's like devil, quote unquote, devil sightings in San Luis Valley, Colorado. But apparently, the San Luis Valley has been a hotspot for paranormal activity, including UFO sightings. There's a UFO tower out there, by the way, guys. If you're ever out there, go visit the UFO tower. The lady who owns it is pretty interesting. Um, there's also like unexplained cattle mutilations, and also people have claimed to see the devil appear in certain spots. And I think I remember seeing somebody talk about the devil like in clubs and things like that. I'm pretty sure there's one in Colorado, and that was where it also started to. Well, I believe the Texas one started, but I think that it kind of carried on to like Colorado.
Yeah, there's that legend. I think it stems across through many different communities. So of course, I mentioned earlier that, yeah, some people say it happened in McAllen, some people say it happened in San Antonio. You've heard about similar stories in Colorado. When I redid that episode recently because it was one of my very first episodes, and I redid it a couple weeks ago, or months maybe, I don't know, but it I ended up finding instances of this story of a young woman who danced with the devil across the world. So I know it stretches as far as like Poland. I think there was a similar
Wow.
story. There was one in New Mexico where their story says that the devil visited seven different bars or clubs in a single night and danced with women. So yeah, this story of a woman dancing with the devil it's very interesting to me because of I think I said in that episode he pulled like a Santa Claus and he traveled to all these bars in one night. But when I do talk about this story, I think it's very important and interesting to note that no matter where this story is being told, so many different details change about whether or not the young woman survived, if and how she was injured, what he looked like, if it was one foot in the other, or if it was both of them that looked like a hoof or a talon or anything. But the one detail that remains constant, that never changes, is it is always with the young woman. And
Ooh.
so I always thought that there was a big misogynistic undertone to that story, because this was a story that I heard in elementary. And so I remember growing up and thinking about it and thinking, okay, well, it's a scary story. And then, okay, it's a scary story telling me to listen to my parents. And then I was like, well, it's always a girl. So it's a scary story telling girls and women that they need to be pious and obedient. And so when you think about it, I think even further, and I say this every time I bring up this story at live events or anything, is the unfortunate reality of the world is that statistically it is a more dangerous place for women and for femmes. And so this is one of those kind of necessary evils to tell the story, to warn people of, the devil is out there, whether the devil is a person that you should not put your trust in. And and I will say, it should not come down to a person to decide who they can and cannot trust. It should be to the devil or men to leave women alone and to not harm them. But it's one of those where it's unfortunate that we have to kind of put that warning out there to be careful, because the devil is out there on the dance floor.
Yes. Yes. No, absolutely. And it's always associated with music, but I also think it's because back then, even then, it's like you couldn't dance a certain way, or like the devil's music, that's the metaphor, the devil's music.
Yeah.
But I love your take on that, because it's so true. And it's so interesting how these stories can be so timeless still, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Very important.
Yeah.
Timeless, but it may evolve with the current status of society and the issues in society. But well, I know we're here getting up at time here, but I guess I wanted to kind of ask you a couple questions before we do the send off.
Yeah.
Are there anything or any projects that you're currently working on that you want the viewers to know about?
Well, so anything that I'm working on, you can find it by following me online. My socials are at Susto Podcast across every social media platform. Something really exciting that I'm currently working on is I'm actually working on a Susto map. So I'm building this kind of interactive map where I'm dropping a pin in all the locations that I've covered a spirit or a cryptid or a strange occurrence. And so I'm still building it out because I have a pretty deep catalog at this point. So I'm working through that right now, and I'm kind of looking at ways to share that map with other people, and maybe build other maps where people can drop their own encounter with the paranormal. So again, if you follow my social media or if you check out my website, sustopodcast.com, everything will be up there. And so I'm excited about this map. And yeah, I know that, there's a few events coming up and doing some interviews here and there. But all of it, again, is put up there on my socials for people to find.
I love that. Oh my God, I'm gonna have to look into that for sure. Where can people find you?
Susto is available on any podcast platform. It's spelled Susto. And also, in case anybody has never heard the word Susto or is unfamiliar with the phenomena, it's a cultural illness where some people believe that after a big scare or something traumatic, the soul separates itself from the body. And depending on which culture or even which community you're speaking to, there are different remedies for Susto. So that's why I, named my show after that.
I love
But
it.
yeah, anywhere podcasts are available, and my website, sustopodcast.com.
Well, thank you so much. I enjoyed having this wonderful conversation with you from your paranormal experiences to a little bit of Texas. And of course, they can always tune into your stuff to do a deeper dive on Texas because I'm sure you've covered a lot of amazing stuff on there regarding that
Oh yeah.
and just your personal stories with it. So remember, everybody, stay
Stay
strange.
strange.
Woo!